Out of all the video essays I've made thus far, I don't think there were any that I was expecting would need a part 2. Maybe the one about Cirque du Soleil and Toruk if that show ever does get revived, but in general, I try to hold off on covering a topic until the story of the production at its center is mostly done. And with the musical Waitress fully closed on Broadway 2 months before the pandemic hit, I was pretty confident that this topic wouldn't need a follow-up.
One of the first songs in the musical Waitress is called Opening Up. Tonight, they'll help Broadway do just that.
Welcome back to Broadway Pie.
I'll be the first to admit I was wrong. So if you somehow clicked on this video without realizing that it's a part 2, let me explain. Back in November 2020, I released a video titled Secret Ingredients: The Cast Replacements of Waitress. The video covered all of the 43 actors who were officially cast in 6 of the musical's lead roles during its nearly 4-year run on Broadway. Some of them were career performers who stepped in and out of the show without much attention in the press. Others were Jason Mraz and Al Roker.
It's one hell of a ride!
The thesis of that video, if I attempt to summarize it, was something like, stunt casting isn't an inherently bad thing when used as a way of expanding the definition of a role, rather than just using cast replacements as marketing. And that, on that front, Waitress had some of the most smartly picked, if odd, replacements of anything recently on Broadway. But once we hit the summer of 2021 and the pandemic appeared to be fading, major asterisk on appeared, but we'll get to that, Broadway was rocked with a surprise announcement that Waitress was going to return to Broadway for an additional 4-month run. Which brings me to a follow-up video. Which of the cast replacements from Waitress's original production returned for the remount? Who was in the show that had never been in the diner before? And how did this remount continue to expand the definitions of these roles? Here, in a much shorter video than before, are the cast replacements of Waitress, Part 2. Back in May 2021, Barry Weissler, one of the lead producers on Waitress, and one half of the couple who popularized the concept of stunt casting back in the 1990s, was interviewed for a Wall Street Journal article about Broadway shows reopening post-pandemic. Ostensibly interviewed as the producer of the soon-to-reopen Chicago, Weissler let some new information slip out. Mr. Weissler added that in addition to reopening Chicago, he is also planning a limited run of Waitress, the Tony Award-nominated musical he produced that closed in early 2020 before the pandemic. The Waitress revival will star Sarah Bareilles, the show's composer and lyricist, he said.
And you're just admitting that?
Yes.
But that's...
A revival of Waitress, yes.
Wait, so did I get him? Is this all over?
This was all the information we had until July 7th, when Waitress formally announced, well, basically the same thing. A limited return to Broadway in September, with composer Sarah Bareilles returning to the lead role of Jenna for a 6-week run. The remount would be the same production as before, although most of the scenic design would be rebuilt from scratch, as many of the original sets were demolished following the show's January 2020 closure. The production would also perform in a new venue, the Ethel Barrymore Theatre, since its original venue, the Brooks Atkinson, was now preparing to host the musical Six. A month later, on August 3rd, casting was announced for Waitress's lead roles. As expected, all 6 of the roles I covered in my last video were to be performed by actors who had played the roles before. Bareilles as Jenna, Drew Gehling as Pomander, Charity Angel Dawson as Becky, Caitlin Houlihan as Dawn, Christopher Fitzgerald as Ogie, and Dakin Matthews as Joe. Of these 6, 4 of them had been in the closing night cast of Waitress, and 3 of them had even been in the opening night cast, all the way back in 2016. With the announcement, however, came the expectation that these returning cast members wouldn't be staying for long. Dawson, Houlihan, Fitzgerald, and Matthews had all already booked other Broadway shows before Waitress announced its limited run, respectively Mrs. Doubtfire, Girl from the North Country, The Revival of Company, and To Kill a Mockingbird. It was assumed that each of the 4 would be gone by November, and that ended up being true, for 3 of them. The exception was Dakin Matthews, who not only was recast in Mockingbird, but who also became the only actor to play one of these 6 leads for the entire remount, with no replacements. As such, I guess this video is now covering 5 roles. The remount of Waitress opened with the aforementioned cast on September 2nd, 2021, and remained static for about a month. However, on October 5th, both Dawson and Houlihan stepped away from the production, making room for 2 actors who didn't appear in my first video. The replacement for Becky, Maisha McQueen, was no stranger to the script, however. She had played Nurse Norma on the first national tour, and had been promoted to Becky on tour when Dawson departed in late 2018. 3 years later, McQueen replaced Dawson again, but this time she was making her Broadway debut, after several years of off-Broadway credits.
Still the feathers rave about sweet, sweet Georgia Brown.
Dawn's replacement, Ashley Blanchett, did have Broadway credits, appearing in the ensemble of shows in the mid-2010s, most notably a star turn in the 2012 Annie revival as, well, star to be. Both McQueen and Blanchett ended up remaining in the cast for the rest of the remount. So, actually, I guess I'm only covering 3 roles at this point. All of the actors in those 3 roles were replaced on October 19th. The new Jenna was Grammy-winning country music star Jennifer Nettles, a member of the group Sugarland, perhaps best known for duetting with Bon Jovi. While Nettles was the most stunt casting out of the actors introduced in this remount, she had been on Broadway before, completing a brief run as Roxy Hart in the Weislers-produced Chicago in 2015. Fitzgerald was replaced as Ogie by Nick Dodani, making his Broadway debut after a fruitful career on television. Atypical on Netflix, Murphy Brown on CBS.
I put my butt on his car.
Excuse me?
But most theater fans, by that point, knew him as Jared in the, let's be charitable and go with much discussed, film adaptation of Dear Evan Hansen.
Shooting a musical is really different than other things because you have to sing and you have to dance.
While Nettles and Dodani were new to the production, Drew Galing's replacement was not. Eric Bergen, who had played 2 brief tours as Pomander during the original run. I also should give an update. In the original video, I introduced Bergen by way of his role on Madam Secretary.
I'm bi, ma'am. Bisexual.
However, in light of the last year, I should introduce Bergen not just as an actor, but as a producer. He's made an unexpected transition throughout the pandemic, coordinating both digital as well as in-person events, as they've become possible. He was the organizer of that wake in Times Square on the Sunday after Stephen Sondheim passed away. Gotta give a shout out for that, because we do love multidisciplinary artists on this channel. Bergen was supposed to only take over for Pomander for 2 non-consecutive weeks, between and after which Galing would return to the role. However, by November, Bergen had extended his second run, and Galing didn't end up returning to the show following the last week of October. The production never gave a formal reason for this odd series of events, so I won't speculate on it. What it meant, practically, was that the final replacements for Jenna, Pomander, and Ogie would all happen within a week of each other, all around Thanksgiving. The first replacement was Nettles, who stepped out as Sierra Renee took over as Jenna. Renee had worked all around the country, most notably as Esmeralda in the first English production of Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame, and she had just taken over the role of Elsa in Frozen before the pandemic shut it down. Renee was also the 3rd actress of color to play Jenna, which became especially significant once the replacements for Pomander and Ogie were announced: Joshua Henry and Tyrone Davis Jr. What that meant was, starting November 29th, 5 of the 6 lead roles in Waitress would be played by black actors. Now, I don't want to say that I called this, but I do remember that in my original video, I said this. No longer was a white Jenna the default, but merely one of the ways that she could be cast. Although TBH, they could have cast more non-white actors in the leads. Just saying. Just saying my middle name might be Cassandra. Henry and Davis Jr. were both Broadway vets, the former being nominated for the Tony for Best Leading Actor twice, for Scottsboro Boys and Carousel. He had also played Aaron Burr on the first national tour of Hamilton. Davis Jr., however, has a different distinction. Back in my original video, I mentioned that while Waitress has internal understudies for each role within its ensemble, it typically filled its replacement actors by bumping up cast members from the tours, or bringing people in fresh, rather than having the understudies take over full-time. The first to do so, and the only one in the original run, was Charity Angel Dawson taking over as Becky. The second, and the only person to do so during the remount, was Tyrone Davis Jr., having played ensemble and Ogie understudy in both the original and remount casts of Waitress. However, there is one small odd detail that I skipped over. Press releases about the changeover listed that Henry and Davis Jr.'s first performances would be November 29th. However, while Dodani's last performance as Ogie was on the 27th, Bergen's final performance as Pomander was on the 24th. meaning that, for 5 days, neither Bergen nor Henry was the official Palmater on Broadway. So, who performed on those days? Luckily, when I asked this question on Twitter, I got actual answers. Waitress stan Rachel reached out to say that from November 25th through the November 27th matinee, understudy Henry Gottfried played Dr. Palmater, and for just the November 27th evening performance, it was swing Brandon Kalm, who had only joined the cast earlier that month. Quick correction, Kalm had joined the Remount cast earlier that month. He had been in the show during its original Broadway run. Both of these actors had gone on for the role before, but in this case, in the absence of another actor that they were formally covering for, I suppose that does technically mean that they were cast as the official Palmaters for just these performances. So, sure, put them on the list. Understudies do deserve a formal shout-out collectively. I didn't cover Understudies in the first video due to a lack of available information about when exactly they covered, but the final weeks of Waitress's run was filled with understudies and swings, just like every other Broadway show dealing with the wave of the virus that sprung up at that point. There were even performances from longtime Jenna understudy Stephanie Torrens, who returned to the show's ensemble in the remount, although she was never the official Jenna, like she briefly was during the original run. With the remount already announced to be closing on January 9th, it was expected that this arrangement of leads would remain in the show until after the new year. Well, shit. In the first video, I discussed how the Waitress cast replacements helped to expand the definition of what each role was, with each replacement actor encouraged to discover their own version of the character. The major adjustments that were explored across the original run of Waitress mostly related to the age and race of the characters, with all 6 leads, except Palmater, seeing non-white actors play those roles for a time, and variants in the ages of characters like Jenna and Ogie shifting the dynamics of those relationships. Looking at the 9 lead actors in Waitress's 2021 remount that didn't appear in the original run, there are some firsts. Though there had been black understudies for Dawn, Ashley Blanchett was the first black actress to play the role full-time. Joshua Henry was the first actor of color to play Dr. Palmater, and when paired with Sierra Renee, resulted in the play centering a black romance, as well as one in the B-plot when Blanchett and Davis Jr. were performing. And Nick Dodani was the first South Asian actor to play any of the 6 leads. Age was also a consideration. Renee is 31 years old, while Nettles is 47. The non-romance half of the story, in which a pregnant Jenna contemplates abandoning her abusive husband Earl, reads differently depending on how long the audience believes the relationship has been going on for. Both valid stories, but distinct for audiences.
Probably 41 or 42.
Thank you.
No, I didn't mean like that.
A shift in Jenna's age also adjusts her relationship to Becky and Dawn. Are these friendships that span a generation gap, or do the trio share a united cultural perspective on relationships? All of these reinterpretations, obviously, still have to be filtered through the script that Bareilles and book writer Jesse Nelson wrote. But the remount cast replacements continue to find new resonances in the script, new elements of the story that the audiences might consider for one actor that they wouldn't consider for another. There is one adjustment to cast replacements that Waitress never truly explored, and that's adjustments to gender. Out of the 52 actors to be cast in these 6 roles in the first run and the remount, June Squibb's Josie remains the only adjustment to the gender of a role. But deeper than that, Waitress never explored the resonance of casting transgender or non-binary actors in any of the roles. All of Waitress's 52 leads were cisgender. Which isn't just me being a militant non-binary person, although I am, don't get it twisted. It's something that would deepen Waitress's extant themes on the politics of gender. Earl discovering Jenna's affair with a female Palmater, or a transgender Dawn being genuinely uncertain of what to do if someone falls in love with them, these are choices that could be explored as the script begins to be licensed. I just wish that the Broadway production of Waitress had tacitly endorsed these sorts of adjustments the way that they did for age and race. But the distinction between performers that's arguably the most different between Waitress's original and remount runs is the topic that I centered the first video around: stunt casting. Out of the 16 actors who played these roles in the remount, only Bareilles and Nettles I would really classify as stunt casting, and even then, minor cases. Bareilles has her authorial attachment to the show, and Nettles I would compare to Jordan Sparks' run as Jenna, a name audiences might know, but who has performance experience on Broadway and whose fanbase the box office wouldn't be directly relying on to boost ticket sales. I might add Nick Dodani to that list, on the grounds that he had never performed on Broadway before and was recently on people's minds for Dear Evan Hansen, but he's another minor case. Nothing reaches the heights of Catherine McPhee or Colleen Ballinger from the original run. Which I feel is a good transition into a topic that I didn't really explore in the first video, the question of why you would use stunt casting in a Broadway show. The definition I gave of stunt casting before was a cast replacement in which the novelty of seeing the actor perform is a marketing consideration in addition to their fitness for the role, and ultimately looking at the replacement actors in both the original and remount runs of Waitress, I don't feel there are any actors on that list who are truly stunt casting, who are brought in solely on their marketability. For an example of a show that is doing that, the still-running revival of Chicago springs to mind. Especially in its remount, Waitress never really needed that sort of publicity boost because, if anything, the show had become the star. There were superfans, like Rachel, who were drawn in by the new actors, or who ran to buy tickets when specific understudies went on. But for the average audience member, the lack of huge names allowed the performers to become more fully lost in the characters. Because, though it may work as a marketing tactic, the artistic drawback of stunt casting comes when audiences are coming to the show to see actors rather than to see the characters. Regardless of how well they were known, the replacement actors in Waitress always played their characters and never just themselves. While some of Waitress's cast replacements are well known, the show was only able to run as long as it did due to the unknown performers, the hardworking actors without the same name recognition, helping your average tourist to fully appreciate the story that Bareilles and Nelson wrote. And not just the listed cast, but the understudies and swings and ensemble members who kept the show afloat before and during the pandemic. They are, as Hugh Jackman recently said, the bedrock of Broadway.
All of these people here, the swings, and I'm emotional because it humbles me, the courage, the brilliance, the dedication, the talent, the swings, the understudies, they are the bedrock of Broadway. Yes. And I want to say thank you to them.
So, while it is fun to walk through the wild history of cast replacements, we should always remember that Waitress found success on Broadway not just because of the actors we know, but because of the actors we don't. Not just because of who the actors are offstage, but because of the characters they allow us to meet on stage. And hopefully, in a short time, we will see them on stage again.